Welcome to True Crime Cases, the program that delves into the most sinister facets of human nature. In today's installment of the Tales That Shock Communities, we travel to Roseville, Minnesota, where after learning that her teenage daughter had been having an affair, the mother killed her by viciously beating her. As a senior at Roseville High School in Minnesota, Eliana was 18 years old. She worked. Despite being seen as a calm, kind girl, Eliana worked part-time at the neighborhood Target. Her life was far from. She had a chaotic home life behind the scenes, mostly because of her tense relationship. Eliana's relationship with her mother, Avery, has never been easy, but Avery's struggles with drinking and emotional instability have gotten worse in recent years. Conflicted with her daughter, and it appeared that their problems stemmed from their jealousy of Eliana's youth. And beauty as a danger, Eliana, a trim and lovely adolescent, had begun drawing notice. Avery, whose beauty was sapped by years of being around guys at school, was not well treated by her mother. She used drugs and alcohol, was self-conscious about her appearance, and believed that her daughter was developing. She was losing something because of independence and beauty, and their conflict intensified when Eliana started having covert affairs with Thea's husband, 36-year-old construction worker James. Avery and the worker had been together for 5 years, but he was abrasive and his reputation wasn't the finest. He had been jailed and participated in several domestic conflicts. For a confrontation with Dina at Eliana's workplace, the Target store over time, although the two started an affair, which Avery didn't initiate, when their connection with Eliana swiftly became improper. Know about it right away. But Eliana's uneasiness and shame about the secret caused the atmosphere at home to. Eliana's yearning to flee the turmoil of her family life was echoed in her even more frantic fantasies. Had intended to leave following graduation in order to enroll at a community college, and then she discussed her aspirations when she transferred to the University of Arizona in Tucson, where her grandparents resided. Of traveling to friends in Minnesota and spending hours watching Netflix and browsing Instagram, and dreaming of a time when she would be able to leave her dysfunctional home. But Eliana's final moments were everything but optimistic, as she was torn between the oppressive tension in her home despite her mother's anger and her covert sexual connection with James was intolerable, and Eliana would have felt that her time was running out as she continued to organize her escape. Eliana's body was found during the storm on the morning of March 28, 2017. That occurred the previous evening in Roseville, Minnesota, leaving the streets blanketed with snow and the temperature, 8 o'clock, much below freezing. A Roseville High School maintenance worker was recognized while making his routine rounds, Henry observed something strange in the parking lot. He initially believed it to be a mound of snow that had been shoved up by a plow. But as he approached, he noticed the terrible reality that Eliana's deceased corpse was left naked and partially covered in snow. Startled, Henry contacted 911 right away to report what he had discovered: a chilly, windswept parking lot. Gave the discovery a somber background, and Eliana's body was obviously traumatized. Henry's face and arms had scrapes and bruises, and she was obviously scared, stating to the police dispatcher that she appeared to have been abandoned outside during the snow for hours. Had almost buried her, and he could see that she had not survived the violent nighttime. Circumstances following the call, witnesses said that Henry remained composed while waiting for the cops to come. He stood outside the school door, away from the cold body, looking pale and anxious. Although the corpse had been somewhat preserved by the temperatures, Eliana's cause of death wasn't immediately. Given the circumstances in her wounds, it was evident that something much more sinister than. When the police came a few minutes later, they promptly roped off the area since hypothermia was present. When started looking into it, the cops discovered that Eliana's corpse had obvious physical attack, with several wounds and bruises visible on her flesh due to the extremely cold temps. And a lot of snow were other important elements that made the investigators believe Eliana had been purposefully put there. Hypothermia would eventually be determined to be the official cause of death, although Investigators looking into foul play were immediately suspicious of the circumstances surrounding her death, started to reconstruct the circumstances leading up to this horrifying discovery in order to find answers about what transpired with Eliana in the hours preceding her demise, and the startling nature of the offense sent spreads throughout the neighborhood, leaving friends and family inconsolable and in quest of answers. The Roseville police responded to the location of this tragedy within minutes of the Detective Gretchen Sarengin, a 15-year veteran renowned for her Thames-led investigations, responded to a 911 call on March 28, 2017. Eliana's body was discovered in a gruesome site in the snow-covered parking lot. Was promptly recognized by the personal belongings discovered next to her, including her phone, which had fallen out. Her frozen corpse had obvious evidence of damage from her sack. Her arms and face were bruised. Were obvious signs that she had been assaulted prior to being abandoned outside of Detective Sarengin, and her colleagues suspected foul play right away, and the snow probably hastened her demise. The medical examiner eventually concluded that Eliana had been left cold after being attacked, based on the bruises. Verified that hypothermia was the official cause of death. Nevertheless, she had been unconscious when, due to her injuries, especially the blunt force damage, she was abandoned in the snow and unable to recover herself. To her skull indicated that she had been brutally battered, most possibly to the point of unconsciousness. The authorities thought Eliana had been slain somewhere else before she was pulled into the weather, and then abandoned in the high school parking lot. The snow surrounding her corpse showed no indications of struggle. This caused authorities to determine that she had been relocated after the assault, and the murderer had most likely utilized the blizzard to mask their footprints in the hopes that the evidence would be obscured by the snow. But investigators were able to reconstruct the events based on the absence of blood at the location and using thermal imaging technology. The detective examined the region for the pattern of the bruises on her body, footprints, and other clues. However, the majority of the traces the investigators gathered had been lost due to the intense snowfall. Any potential proof, such as tire marks that were still barely discernible close to her corpse, discovered. The site was secured, and investigators then focused on possible suspects after learning that whoever did this had used one of the year's greatest snowstorms as an opportunity to conceal their. The first person detectives focused on after learning of the incident was James, 36. James had dated Eliana's mother Avery for 5 years, but he was known for his violent past and erratic temper. A notorious construction worker in Roseville, he has been engaged in a number of. His relationship with Avery has been anything but tranquil throughout the years due to household conflicts. Records revealed several instances of the two getting into violent altercations, which were frequently caused by, within months, one of the most well-known episodes involving alcohol and James's domineering personality took place. James had lost his temper before Eliana died in the business where she worked in late 2016. Witnesses reported seeing Eliana working as a part-time cashier inside the Target supermarket shop. He ultimately whipped Avery with his belt in front of them after dragging her by the arm down one of the aisles. A little quarrel about groceries had set off the astonished Chopper's outburst, but it swiftly developed into a public demonstration of James's aggressive inclinations, but Avery had declined to file a complaint. Following the incident, stating that she was emotionally and financially dependent on him, stood out to investigators when they looked more closely at James's past, creating a portrait of a guy. He was accustomed to using violence and terror to dominate the women in his life. When James was brought in for interrogation after Eliana was killed, he seemed aloof and chilly and shown little worried about Eliana's passing, and investigators soon discovered an even more sinister. James secretly acknowledged that in recent months, his connection with Eliana had become sexual, despite he declined to go into detail about the nature of their connection or how it began, the revelation stated. A troubling aspect of the case, the police now had a reason for James's close involvement with the daughter of his girlfriend, and the strain in the home had been increasing. Eliana's. She then disclosed to her pals that she had told them about her mother's growing jealousy. Despite James's lack of symptoms, this revelation increased the investigation's stakes. His violent past and unsettling bond with Ileana caused him to feel guilty during his interrogation. A top suspect, but his composed and apparently dispassionate answers throughout interrogation kept preventing investigators from drawing hasty judgments. Avery, 40, has battled alcoholism for a long time, and mental instability, her alcoholism, and her incapacity to maintain. She was now dependent on her husband James for both financial support and vulnerability as a result of having a stable career. Given a consistent flow of alcohol over time, Avery's emotional health had declined, and many of her neighbors characterized her as unpredictable, frequently alternating between quiet periods and unexpected outbursts when, although she was mostly unemployed, she occasionally took up odd jobs and James's salary as a contractor. Her primary lifeline was her worker, which led to a poisonous dynamic in their connection with Avery. Driven by her reliance on him, Avery's self-esteem issues were worse by the jealousy she harbored for her daughter Ileana. Ileana was everything Avery believed she could no longer be when she was 18. As Ileana grew older and grew Avery's fears, she was gorgeous and had her entire life before of her. Family and close friends saw that Avery frequently used passive-aggressive language on Ileana's looks, implying that she was envious of her own daughter and felt overshadowed by her. Only become more intense once Avery learned that Ileana had slept with James's awareness that her daughter, whom she had reared, had started dating. Avery's mental instability was exacerbated by her marriage since Ileana, the person Avery couldn't comprehend that someone she had always envied was now having sex with James. After Ileana's death, Avery was brought in by the police for interrogation, and she looked angry and messy. A far cry from the composed, helpful manner she had shown when the police initially arrived at the crime scene. Her account was erratic, and she frequently digressed on her personal issues with James. Accused him of being the cause of her discontent and the frequent arguments between. Investigators saw that Avery was quite emotional, but they weren't sure if this was due to actual sadness. When a more serious and hazardous tumult was unknown, Avery acknowledged under questioning that she had been conscious of James and Ileana's developing intimacy, even though she played down the importance of their connection, but detective was unable to overlook the tension that had been evidently building. Avery's dependency on James, coupled with her feelings of inadequacy and her anger at Ileana, depicted a lady on the verge of losing her temper, whereas Dana first asserted, although she was not responsible for Ileana's murder, the investigators started to believe that her jealousy could have played a far bigger part than she was admitting. Ileana's ex-boyfriend was Hudson, 17. He and Ileana had dated for a while, and he was known for being a gifted athlete with a quick fuse. Nearly a year, and throughout that period, Hudson displayed qualities of possessiveness and jealousy that worsened as their relationship came to an end. By March 2017, it had become into. Friends claimed that Ileana and Hudson had a tense relationship before Ileana ended it. Hart finding it difficult to understand Ileana's desire to go on with her life in the days before. Witnesses saw Hudson and Ileana fighting in public on many occasions before Ileana passed away. They got into a fight in a nearby mall after running into each other next to a Starbucks. When Ileana revealed her intentions to leave Roseville and start over, tensions erupted. Hudson had always. Ileana's choice to move on without him seemed to reflect his anxiety of losing control over the people in his life. To strike a chord, he was well known for being fiercely competitive on the football pitch, and when the police hauled Hudson in, it appeared that his desire to succeed extended to his personal connections as well. During interrogation, he first came out as composed yet aloof, in sharp contrast to the more sentimental. He clarified the other suspect responses by saying that although he and Ileana had split up, they had stayed on cordial terms, but investigators quickly noticed the discrepancies. When questioned about the nature of their conflicts, he became evasive in his statement and became clearly. When the topic of her leaving town was brought up, investigators thought Hudson had possibly motivated by disappointment and envy, He had failed to keep Ileana under control throughout their. He may have been driven over the brink by their love and her want to go on, but Hudson maintained. His demeanor and body language during the interview indicated that he wasn't. Being completely honest about his annoyance with Ileana's independence and future ambitions made him. Police and the person of interest believe that he could have acted out in a fit of wrath, notwithstanding Hudson's attempts to disassociate himself from the circumstance. His relationship with Ileana and his background of his mental instability kept him under constant observation, so detectives realized they needed to continue their investigation to ascertain if Hudson was involved in her untimely demise. The inquiry took an unexpected turn in late March 2017, when authorities discovered important new information that clarified Ileana's. The morning of James's death was quite cold, and there was a lot of snow. The streets of Roseville, Minnesota, were still covered by a late-season blizzard, and police had been soothing via Ileana's email accounts, social media messages, and digital footprints when they came upon a string of communications that Ileana and Hudson had exchanged. The text disclosed, surprise, Ileana had been quietly preparing to depart Roseville and take a rideshare to. Ileana confided in Hudson about these communications from Arizona, where her grandparents had retired. Her wish to flee the chaos in her family life, as she had been becoming increasingly concerned about her safety. She expressed uncertainty about her capacity to remain in her mother's home any longer since she felt confined there by the poisonous atmosphere, James's approaches, her mother's jealousy, and the oppressive drama that the messages that encircled them depicted a young woman in dire need of a new beginning. The cops promptly changed their focus from the man that had taken over her life. Seeing that Ileana's departure preparations had probably increased domestic tensions, they suspected that Ileana's mother, Avery, may have learned of her daughter's escape strategy and responded aggressively in response to Ileana's intimate friendship with James, which was already causing envy. Dino may have been driven over the line by Ileana's plans to leave him, so detectives started to examine Avery's previous actions and her location on the evening of Ileana's passing in further detail. The finding of these texts also brought up further concerns regarding Hudson's awareness of the threat. Was he somehow engaged in Ileana's departure plan, or perhaps her demise? The Hudson family's emotional. He was suspected because of his instability and previous disagreements with Ileana. The new evidence indicated that his involvement may be more intricate than authorities first believed, according to this recent revelation. A more distinct reason for the crime, which enabled detectives to begin assembling the circumstances that led to Ileana's murder, and it was now a race against time to find out who was responsible. According to the authorities, one of Ileana's closest friends was able to carry out such a vicious deed. Using the fresh information from witness interviews and Ileana's digital chats, they focused on. The ultimate revelation regarding Avery was made by investigators when they learned that Avery had Ileana's intention to go, as well as her daughter's continued sexual involvement with. Ileana and her husband, James, combined to deliver 2 deadly strikes, caused a violent death, and Dina's initial feelings of humiliation and abandonment were overwhelming. She was already emotionally disturbed and battling alcoholism when she saw Ileana, and she was envious as a danger in several respects, and she thought Ileana had taken James away from her as their. This betrayal was a sign that the relationship had progressed from flirting to something far more serious. Avery becomes furious late at night as a result of Ileana's preparations to flee their shared age. Of March 26, 2017, following an altercation that swiftly got out of hand, Avery assaulted Ileana in there. Avery viciously beat her daughter in their little Roseville home with everything she could find, driven by rage and booze. She was able to locate household items in her fists, and Savage was attacking anything else in the area. And Ileana was rendered unconscious, unable to protect herself from her mother's unbridled rage. When Avery realized what she had done, she became terrified. There was a severe snowstorm outside. Roseville streets were whipped by freezing winds in a last-ditch effort to hide. As punishment for her transgression, Avery took her daughter's lifeless body outside into the bitter cold, hoping that the bad weather would. Circumstances would hide the severe abuse Avery inflicted on Eliana's comatose, wounded body in the parking lot of a nearby school in the hopes that the snowfall would cover up any evidence of her involvement in the D had a definite suspect on April Fool's Day after officers were able to piece together the date and motive. Was taken into custody at the residence she had previously lived with Eliana. She displayed no emotion throughout the arrest. It had appeared from her manner that she had long since accepted the repercussions of her. Avery hardly responded, neither startled nor sorry, when presented with the proof. The arrest left Eliana's friends and family inconsolable, unable to process the terrible reality that her mother was the cause of her untimely death. By March 2018, when the trial of Avery for killing her daughter Eliana had captured the attention of the prosecution's Roseville, headed by 38-year-old Associate District Attorney Marissa Greggs, who is renowned for her direct approach, said that Avery killed her daughter out of a poisonous mix of desperation, anger, and envy. Griggs provided proof of Avery's violent outburst upon her discovery of Eliana's connection. The prosecution portrayed James as a woman who was motivated by her desire to flee her home. Feelings of betrayal and abandonment drove Griggs to madness, exploding in the most vicious manner imaginable. Highlighted the severity of the assault and the extent to which Avery staged the crime scene, and how she hoped the blizzard would conceal the fact that she had abandoned her daughter to perish in the bitter cold. Actual cause of death. The defense team, led by lawyer Scott, sentenced a well-known 45-year-old, sought to claim that Avery had no intention of killing her daughter Lansing in order to take on challenging cases. Asserted that Avery had been overburdened by years of financial and mental stress, which had been exacerbated by her defense strategy centered on her alcoholism and the poisonous connection with James Lansing. Depicting Avery as a victim of her circumstances, a woman driven to the verge of despair by years of disregard. Despite mistreatment from James as well as from life in general, he maintained that Eliana's passing was sad accident rather than intentional murder, and Eliana's friends and family were present during the emotionally intense trial. Family members occupying the courtroom, including her high school friends, old Target co-workers, and even when neighbors arrived to see the events, Eliana's surviving family members were clearly upset. Shook during the trial, particularly as they learned the terrible details of her last moments. Following days of deliberation, the jury convicted Avery of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life in jail, a decision that left many people feeling torn. Some thought the sentence was reasonable, while others felt it was too light considering how horrible the crime was. Taking into account Avery's emotional condition at the moment for her loved ones, no sentence could bring, leaving them to deal with a loss that would impact them for years to come once she returned. After the trial ended in March 2018, Avery was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For the murder of her daughter Eliana, she was sentenced to years in jail in Minnesota. Shaco Correctional Facility is well known for holding female prisoners and providing a range of activities targeted at. Avery battled thoughts of shame and distress as she adjusted to her new environment at rehabilitation. According to various accounts, she struggled to adapt to jail life and frequently isolated herself. Avery's battle with alcoholism persisted, and she engaged in substance misuse, according to other prisoners. Programs to help her deal with the issues that had plagued her for years, while James, the lover of Eliana's mother, was involved in this unfortunate situation in a complex way. James had to deal with his own repercussions when Eliana passed away, including losing his construction job. He relocated as a result of the case's public outcry and the examination of his prior behavior, away from Roseville in order to prevent community opposition. However, local news reports showed that he was still having trouble keeping a steady job, and acquaintances mentioned that he felt bad about participating in the disintegration of the family, but frequently avoiding accountability. James eventually decided to live a modest life away from the spotlight as he struggled with the part he performed in. The circumstances that resulted in Kaya's untimely death and Hudson, Eliana's former lover, also had to deal with the consequences of the fallout following their split. Hudson was said to be upset and turned into a target of gossip and conjecture in their neighborhood and school, experiencing jealousy. Hudson struggled to deal with the loss. He graduated from high school in June 2018, but found it difficult to find direction. He relocated to a nearby town to begin over, but the recollections of Eliana. His pals reported that he frequently thought about their turbulent relationship. Given previous behavior and the unfortunate result of the circumstance, he sought treatment to deal with his emotions. The effects of C's murder on the Roseville community were still evident in the form of remorse and regret. Numerous locals engaged in conversations and attended memorial services held in her honor. Regarding the mental health effects of domestic abuse and the significance of community support networks, but Eliana's tale ended tragically, but her legacy motivated people to push for reform so that her life would, and the events leading up to her passing would not be forgotten, including the terrible killing of Eliana, serves as a warning that jealous rage can destroy even the tightest of partnerships. Despite the fact that justice was delivered, terror took control, leaving her family and friends in anguish. Will endure forever. Thank you for tuning in to this True Crime Case Files episode. Us again when we unearth more startling examples that continue to perplex and unsettle. Stay safe. Hey everyone, if you're a true crime case solver looking for more real-life murder mysteries you'll love. Additionally, do you have any opinions regarding this case or a case of your own? Subscribe to our channel. If you're owned that you would want us to look into, please leave a remark and be careful. True Crime Case Solvers.